Thank you very much for having me. And I was mentioning earlier, this was a repeat of what we had done with Autodesk University a few months back. So if any of you did have a chance to attend that session, what you're going to see here is quite similar to that in terms of the slide deck. I've got a little bit more in terms of a hands-on demo or live demonstration for some of the more complex scripts that I was talking about in the Autodesk University presentation. So hopefully near the end, you'll get to see some extra things, and it won't quite be just the same as it was. This one's also going to be quite a bit of live sort of jumping back and forth between the PowerPoint and a couple of notepad documents that I use for scripting, plus the spreadsheets that we're talking about here for some functionality that is really, really handy when you can leverage that for helping generate those scripts, and especially the more complex ones that have numbers and numbers of lines and repeating content as well. So thank you again for inviting me. Thanks for having me on for the AutoCAD user group presentation. And let's get started. So as Laurie mentioned, my name is Matt Miyamoto. I am currently the ISD Professional Services Team Manager out on the West Coast. My title changed. I used to be the project manager for all of our professional services, sort of shifted regionally just a few months ago. So now I am back in charge of the team, but also in charge of projects that we do along the way. My background's in civil engineering. I was a civil design engineer for about 7 years before I joined the Autodesk reseller channel. I started out in my career while I was a student in college in the late 90s, and just sort of continued on doing that, and then got interested in teaching and training and finding out more about Autodesk software. So in 2008, I joined the reseller channel. The company that I previously worked for was acquired by Imaginet in 2018, I believe, and that's how long I have been with Imaginet Technologies. I am a Autodesk certified instructor, certified professional in AutoCAD and Civil 3. I used to do a lot of tech support and a lot of training prior to taking on the team manager role and the project management role. So a lot of my background is still on the technical side, although I don't do a whole lot of it now. I still try to help come up with ways that we can do things more efficiently, and scripting was one of the more interesting ones that I found in the past couple of years. And these always tend to come up in random requests or little bugs and little features that we don't quite see the program doing that we think it's supposed to do. One of the more recent ones that I can bring up is we were trying to do some layer translation from one file to another. And if anybody's familiar with the layer translator tool, we're mapping one layer in a current drawing to another destination layer that you'd like to have in a resource drawing. And in that particular case, we were noticing that if you save a layer translator file and load it up into another drawing for use, it does not load the plot styles. Now, plot styles were all defaulting back to just the standards. So no matter what we did, once we saved it out and reloaded it back in, it was doing everything except plot styles. And a quick solution for that was just generated a quick layer script and made it change the plot style. So we would run the translator and then just drop the script in there, and that was it. And it worked to resolve the issue. And that was something that was pretty easy to do, especially with spreadsheets. So that was another situation where, although scripts are relatively basic, they can come in handy when you find the right scenario to apply them to. So in terms of today's agenda, I have 4 primary topics that I was planning to cover. The first being just a basic overview and understanding of what scripts do and how they work inside of AutoCAD. A couple of criteria that I try to use to determine whether or not it's really worth building a script or not. And then also creating a basic working script. So if you have scripting experience already, if you've built any in the past, then this first section might be quite basic for you. Although if you don't have any scripting experience, or if it's something that you've been interested in, there might be some nice tips that you can pick up along the way when we generate that first AutoCAD script. And it'll just be a pretty standard script. I'll show you how I get to the steps that are involved. I'll write it out in a notepad document, and then we'll drop it into AutoCAD and see how it works. After that, we're going to take a look at a little bit more advanced levels of scripting, where we've got multiple lines and we've got a lot of content that we need to manage. And in that case, we are going to jump into spreadsheets for those. There's a couple of tricks that you can do with spreadsheets to help copy content over, especially when working with layers and layer properties. So I've got a few examples there set up to go over, and I will run through those live, as well as talk about a couple of different things that you can do with different commands that are available that will actually run through a script. And then finally, when we do the output to the script files, scripts are really just going to be a text file with a different extension. So that one's going to be a very, very easy process. It's primarily just finding the file and changing the extension. But there's also a couple of shortcuts you can do. You can start out with a blank SCR file that you just delete stuff out of and then copy and paste as you go. That way you don't have to worry about converting them along the way. And also from Excel, if you're using the spreadsheet, you can also export those out to text file or TXT files pretty easily, and then change the extensions there if you've got a very complex one. So those are the items that we'll be covering in terms of the agenda. And if anybody's got questions, again, please feel free to type those in, and then we'll try and open it up for some live Q&A at the end as well. I saw one message pop up a little while ago about sound. I'm hoping that that's all been resolved and that everyone can hear me now. But if you are still having sound issues, Lori might be able to help out with that. So AutoCAD scripting basics. I would like to start out with just a basic understanding and overview of scripting in general for this one. And when we're talking about AutoCAD scripts, I'm talking about files that are essentially just a .scr file. And script files are going to be files that call commands based on text entry in AutoCAD. So what that means is it's essentially just going to be typing in the letters at the command line for you. But instead of having to type them in manually over and over by yourself, you can predefine these in a text file and then just drag and drop them into AutoCAD, and it will run everything that you've got written inside of that text file. In order to set this up, though, it does need to be formatted in a quite specific way. For example, when we're working inside of AutoCAD, if you're typing in a command, you hit the space bar or you hit the enter key, and it'll enter the command. It's the same thing with a script file. If you're typing it out in a notepad, if I'm typing in C for circle, for example, I would type in C, and then I either hit the enter key or the space bar, and that would count as the same enter keystroke or space bar keystroke inside of AutoCAD at the command line. So we can create scripts in long horizontal strings of just spaces in between everything, or we can also create scripts in vertical strings where we hit enter every time and then we get another line for each entry that we need to use inside of AutoCAD. So it's really going to be personal preference as to how you do those. I've found that it's actually, I kind of switch back and forth depending on the type of script that I'm writing. You're going to see a few that I have where it's pretty basic, and I'll just write one horizontal string of commands. And then there's also a couple where I've got a lot of calls and a lot of different resources that I'm trying to pull in, and a lot of different variables that I want to set up. So those have multiple lines so that I can kind of see them more clearly when I'm writing them out. I see a question that just popped up about how script files different from Lisp routines. Script files are really, really basic. So we're talking about, no prompts, no pauses, no user entry. It's all going to be exactly what you type into the script file. They're very, very easy to create because they are just a text file, and they're very, very easy to run because all you need to do is drag and drop the file into your AutoCAD session. So it's really just a quick way to get sort of basic level automation. When you're looking at Lisp routines and macros, those are getting into higher level, more complex types of automation where you got to know a little bit more about programming, you got to do a little bit more in compiling, and there's a little bit more to it than that. So I try to keep it as basic as I can, just leveraging the simplicity of it all to kind of add some of the automation to AutoCAD processes. I see another question there. Does the semicolon character count as a space or enter key? That's a good question. I actually have a mention of that in an upcoming slide, so I will talk about that in a little bit. When I go back to this one here, I talked about the space or the enter key for the command line there. And what we're also going to try and focus on when we write scripts are root commands. So if you are familiar with standard AutoCAD or sort of classic AutoCAD, we have kind of a standard command that we type in, purge, for example, PURG, When we type that in, you get a little dialog box that pops up, and you get to click on some options and click OK to run the command. Root commands start with a dash or a minus sign, and what it'll do is it'll trigger command line entry based prompts rather than a dialog box based prompt. And when we're running scripts, because we are focused all on command line entry, that's really the key for what we are shooting for. So we're going to do a lot of command line entry, and in cases where there are dialog boxes by default with standard commands, we're going to try and trigger the root command by adding that dash symbol before the standard command is typed in, so that everything is command line driven versus the dialog box. So purge is the example that I've got here down at the bottom in the screenshot there, where we've got command line entry. The first key in is dash purge, then there's a space or an enter key, and then if we wanted to purge out empty text objects, we would type in the E option as our choice, and we'd hit enter again or space again, and it would purge out empty text objects. Now, when we're doing this, the dash purge command has empty text objects, it's got reg apps, it's got orphan data, and it's got something else I think it was in there. And when we do this, if we want to purge them all out, we'd have to type them in, one by one. So dash purge E, dash purge R, dash purge O, dash purge, and keep repeating that over and over and over again. So that's a really good example for a basic script file that you could run, because it is stringing the same command over and over, and they're all text-based entries that you could use at the command line. Another good example for scripting is working with layers. Layers, tons and tons of different layer properties, and all of them can be command line driven. The layer delete command, the layer merge command, layer properties can all be set. Creating layers, renaming layers, those can all be controlled with script files, because they are all things that you can be prompted for at the command line. So the other screenshot that I have there is for a layer merge command. And in that case, we're merging an existing default set of layers. When we click on new layers, layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, and we're going to rename all of those to our company specific layers. So I've imagined it layer 1, layer 2, layer 3. So instead of going in and renaming them one by one, I can just drop this straight into AutoCAD, and it'll rename all of those as is. Now, it does have to be specific. So if I don't have layer 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 as it's showing here, it's not going to know what to rename. So your script is very, very specific in the sense that if it sees something that doesn't exist, or if it's prompting you for something and the entry doesn't match, that's where you're going to run into a lot of kickback errors. And typically it'll just stall out, and it'll just stop at the command that it's on, and then you cancel it and you try and figure out what's going on from there. There's not a lot of debugging that you can do with scripts besides testing. So it does require some trial and error. But once you get a good working script in order, it's quite easy to copy and paste content from there, as long as you know that it's working. The only other issue that I run into from time to time is if I am copying and pasting content, once in a while I'll get an extra cell from a spreadsheet, or I'll get an extra space from a text file that I have, and then that would be something that you'd have to go back and try and delete. Is there a difference between a tab and a space? If you are typing it out manually inside of a notepad document, I would recommend either space bar or the enter key, just to be consistent. But if you're copying out of Excel and pasting it into a notepad document, it does tend to transfer that as a tab, which will still work. It just has to be a single gap. So whether it's a tab gap or a space gap, that seems to work when we are pasting it into the notepad document. But if I'm typing it out, I try to repeat as close as I can to what I would be actually typing into AutoCAD in the command line. And that just kind of gives me a little bit more of a cross check when I'm trying to use this. So getting back to the AutoCAD scripts here, when do we use scripts or when do we not use scripts? So one of the examples I gave earlier was if it's a command that has all non-dialog box entries, so text-based entry at the command line. So things that are defaulting to dialog box, you'd want to use the root commands. If you're commands that don't have the option of not using a dialog box, so there are some, especially when we're getting into verticals like Civil 3D, for example, is all dialog box driven. So a lot of the content in Civil 3D wouldn't be applicable to a script, but you might be able to get something out of like a macro or a list routine there or some additional programming. So basic command line entry, repeating commands over and over. The purge example there that I had earlier, this is the purge script that would be running zero length geometry, empty text objects, reg apps, and orphan data. So that's all going to be run in one sequence, and the results would pop up in the command line just like you would have been typing them in one by one. And then also defined user input. So what we want there is we really want to have something that we can automate from start to finish. If you are going to use multiple entries and things like that, then there might be some ways that you can do it. But typically, when we're shooting for automation, I'm trying to get something in here that is it's as automated as I can. So I want to just drag and drop it and see the results in the end. And that's kind of the level of the scripts that we had set up for the presentation here with automation. So when we're looking at this now, let's take a look at actually creating a basic AutoCAD script. So inside of a Notepad file or inside of an Excel sheet, what we would do is we just start out with a blank document. So this is a blank Notepad document here. And in terms of the purge command that we were looking at, that was a dash purge, and then a space for a Z. That's our prompt. And another dash purge, a space for an O for the orphan data, and so forth. So you're really just looking through this, and you are typing in essentially the same sequence of commands that you would be typing in at the command line. So if I had the command line here and I was typing in dash purge, when I hit enter, it's going to prompt me for the option that I want. So I'm looking through the list here, and I'm going to choose my Z for zero length geometry and enter. So dash purge Z, that was the first sequence that I typed in. If I need to repeat that, dash purge, and then the next option, maybe O for orphan data, is going to look for orphan data. Now, if I do a dash purge and I do a Z, or sorry, an E, that gives me my empty text objects. And then the reg apps is the one that's got a little bit more options built into it. So I do a dash purge R. This one's got a couple of additional prompts afterwards. So dash purge is going to ask me for the names of the items to purge. That's where I'd have to type in the asterisk symbol if I want to get them all. And then whether I want to verify each name to be purged, yes or no. And if I want to say, I don't want to verify the names, I just want them to all get purged out, I would do an N for no. So in that case, what we're doing is we are running that command with 2 additional prompts. So when we type that one out, or when we look at the actual sequence for that, what we're going to see is we've got a dash purge with a R and then a star, asterisk, and then an N. So we need all 3 of those in sequence to pop up inside of our script file. And also, after we type in the O at the end, we do need an extra space, because that space is going to be or perform as like the enter key for entering that option within the script file. So if I were to take this and go back to my Notepad document, that content would be essentially what I would be pasting into my Notepad document. So you can see that it comes in here, and the question about tab keys were asked earlier. When I copy and paste from Notepad, the cells show up as like tab delimited. So that's going to be a single gap, but it is a tab instead of a space bar or an enter key. And you can see here as well, there is an extra space after the O. If I were to delete that, it would stop on the O at the command line, and that's where it would stop the script as well. So you would see an O pop up at the command line in the AutoCAD session, but when we actually run the script, it won't complete all the way through to the process. And at that point, you just hit enter, and it would accept the final command there. So if we've got something like this where we are able to string in the letters and the keyboard entry commands, the next step would be to do a save or save as. When you do a save as inside of Notepad, the default file format is going to be a .txt file. Scripts are .scr files. So after this file is saved, the only extra step would be to find that file and then go back and change the extension to .scr. That's going to convert it to a script file automatically. Another shortcut that you can do, which is something that I started doing quite recently for just testing purposes, is if you have something like a blank script file. So I have another file here that I just pre-saved as blank SCR. So now it's already got the right file format. And if I need to do a quick test script, I could just drop it, copy and paste it here, and just do a save. And that's going to allow me to already have that SCR format on hand. It's something that I can drop into AutoCAD when I need to. So if you want to do a process where you're looking at it all the way through, you can save it as a .txt, or if you're looking at a text file that's exported out of Excel, you could save it as a .txt and then change it to .scr. When we're looking at that script itself, if I've got the purge script, what I can do is simply drag and drop that in there, and then within the command line, again, it shows me that it's running a script file, does the dash purge for orphan data, does the dash purge for reg apps, does the dash purge for everything else. So when we go through that, it's essentially then just a drag and drop, which makes it very, very nice and very convenient for running scripts inside of AutoCAD really quickly, because it doesn't require you to load anything else. Shortcuts should work. So command shortcuts will work. If you do a command shortcut, as long as it is recognized as command line entry, that should be okay. I tend to start out with full commands just to be safe. You never know what people put in as like their own custom shortcuts. So if someone had customized it and they have different shortcut for the letter combination than you do, then that might be something that that you want to be aware of. For example, I always change my copy command to CC instead of CO. CO is the default shortcut for copy, but I do CC because it's all on the same side of the keyboard. That's been just habit from, I don't know, 25 years ago. So it's one that I always change. I prefer that, so I can just hit it. My left hand is a keyboard entry instead of having to move around on the keyboard. So the only trouble with keyboard shortcuts would be if you are working with someone that's got customized commands there. So how scripts work, again, we're looking for that .scr file, and it's really just a plain text file that's got a different extension at the end of it. When we're looking for commands, we want to start out with root commands where possible to trigger the non-dialog box based entry. And then if you have to enter file names, so this is another kind of tricky one with scripts. With script files, it does not like spaces in file names and things, because it's looking at a space as like an enter key. But if you do need to enter file names inside of a prompt, you can use file DIA. So file DIA is the one that turns off the dialog boxes to find and locate specific files, and it prompts you for actual file path entry. So file DIA, setting that to 0 is going to prompt you for file path entry. That's going to allow you to put in actual file paths. If you have a semicolon, this is a question that came up earlier. So semicolons to start a line would create sort of like a note line for you. So it'll ignore that line in the code. So if you start out with a semicolon, then you can put in some notes there for what the script does or for what different columns do. And that's going to allow you to add some additional text that's not going to be read as part of the script. I did mention scripts don't like spaces and command entries. So if you've got things like file names, when we look at one of the more advanced scripts that I have for page setups and so forth, plot styles and plot configuration files that have spaces, I ended up having to create a copy of that with underscores in them instead of the spaces. It was just something that the script file did not like. So I would do the underscores and try to avoid spaces in things like PC3 files and plotter configuration files. The real big advantage again to scripts is it's just a drag and drop. So you don't have to load anything, you don't have to run any background commands. You can take a script that's saved on your desktop or in a folder and drag it into any AutoCAD session. And as long as the commands are recognized, it's going to work. If you are looking for a way to get an automated script, so it's not an outside source, it's saved somewhere inside of AutoCAD, there's a way that you can also copy some script content into a custom macro or custom command and then add that to the tool palette. And that's something that I'll kind of walk through at the end as well. So there's a couple of questions that are coming up. Can you use script files to change layer states? You can change layer properties with scripts for sure. You can launch the layer command and then go through any of the prompts to change colors, line types, plot styles, all of those things. How do you get the escape key to stop a command? You just have to press escape. There's no key in command for escape. The Control-C, Control-C thing that works with macros does not, unfortunately, work with scripts. So if you are at the end of a command, you just have to press escape on your own. And if you get all the way through your script and the last step is just, the prompt is there and you need to cancel it out, I would just be hitting escape anyway. And yes, the response for that, if it can't be typed using the command line, it can't be run in the script. That's generally what I go with. If it is not something that I can enter at the command line, then it's not going to work. If you're going for something that's going to be higher levels of automation, again, that's probably beyond basic script functionality. So you're looking at more like a macro or a list at that point. And this was one of those things that we try to keep it as basic as we could to start out with some automation and introduce some automation. So if you've got more advanced questions about automation, then that's likely something we need to follow up with you after the fact. So now when we have a better understanding of scripts themselves, let's take a look at how we can leverage spreadsheets for script generation. And in this particular case, what we're trying to do is we're trying to take advantage of the functionality that's inside of a spreadsheet. So when we're writing out a script in general, we might just be using a plain text file, which looks okay when it's pretty simple, but as scripts get more and more and more complex, those text files are going to get more and more and more confusing. There's no real way to neatly organize a script in a text file. So for example, I've got one that generates layers, and if I open this one up for you, this is the actual script file that is being used to generate these layers. And I would not want to type this out or have to sort through this at all if I had to just look at it in a text file. So this is something that started out inside of a spreadsheet, and a lot of it was filled out with autofill. A lot of it was filled out with linked cells to content that was copied and pasted. And then once it was done, it was transferred over into the script file itself. So it started out inside of a spreadsheet and then got transferred over to the text file just to do the final conversion into the script. So when we're looking at spreadsheets, the reason why I really like this, again, number one is for organization. When we're looking at the content in the spreadsheet, each cell is an entry at the command line. So when we're looking at the first cell, that's going to be the first thing you type in. If you go to the next cell, that's going to be as though you hit enter or the space bar and you're typing in the next thing. So we can string these out horizontally from cell to cell if you want to see the sequence of commands all in a single row. If you are looking at columns, when we're looking at columns, that would be like you're pressing the enter key. So if I wanted to do enters along the way and see them stacked from top to bottom, I could do the same series of commands but press enter each time. And as long as everything is in the same row or same column, excuse me, and lined up, when I copy that over, it's going to create one single line of script inside of the text file as well, or excuse me, one single column of script inside of the text file. So it is really going to come down to personal preference in that case. I try to keep everything as consistent as I can whenever I'm working inside of the spreadsheet so that I can add different color-coded items or different labels along the way. And that just kind of helps me go back to it later on. Or if I'm working with a colleague that needs to look at the script as well, adding those notes or adding those color codes to the Excel spreadsheet just helps figure out and define what's being used and what the intent is of the file itself. I also started to leverage some lookup tables in some cases. If you've got things like plotter configuration files that you know that you're going to have access to, I've started populating some lookup tables with that just so I don't run into any typos within the names, and I know that I'm calling for the right list of options there. I'm not pulling in something that's not going to be available. That's another way that you can do it. It's a little bit more on the pre-setup side of things. If you really know what you're doing and you're only going to focus on one of them, then you don't really need tables, but that is another way you can leverage the spreadsheet. Highlighting and color coding, again, I've started using that quite a bit, especially with the more complex ones. I've created a script library as well, so I could have multiple tabs within the same spreadsheet that I can compile and organize all of my scripts in. That way I just have one spot that I can go to look up everything. If I've got content from another script that I want to reference into a new one, then I have them all in that same spreadsheet as well. I don't have to worry about opening up multiple text files or script files and finding the content and copying and pasting them there. And then autofill. Autofill is one of the big ones. I think I mentioned that already, but autofill is really one of the bigger ones that I try to leverage, especially when working with layers. And I think that's one of the examples that I'll jump into in a little bit here. When we do a save as out of a spreadsheet, you are going to get a text file option, but keep in mind it's going to convert the whole spreadsheet into a text file, so you got to be a little bit careful there. As I went farther and farther down into my script library spreadsheet where I've got multiple tabs, it's actually been faster for me to just highlight and copy and paste the content from a tab into that blank SCR file that I've got. That's been saving me a couple of steps along the way. So I've actually started doing that instead of exporting out to text first and then changing the file format. And that's just based on organization and how I've been testing some of the latest scripts that I've done. So converting TXT to SCR files, it's really just clicking on it. So the only issue that you're ever going to have is if you've got your Windows set up to hide file extensions, then you're not going to be able to get to that .scr, .txt extension to change. Beyond that, it is really just clicking on it, deleting the .txt and replacing it with .scr. Once you do that, it's going to change the icon. You're going to see a little red box with a SCR on the bottom, and that's all it needs to be. When you're using this, again, if you are exporting it out from a spreadsheet, if you've got multiple tabs, I would recommend exporting that particular tab out first so that only that one gets converted. Otherwise, the whole file gets converted to a .txt and it might mess up some of the functionality that you've got in there. And also, if you want to go backwards, so if you've got existing scripts that you want to put into a spreadsheet, you can actually copy the content out of the SCR file and then paste it into Excel, and it should read the spaces as indicators for different cells. So when it pastes into the spreadsheet, it should lay it out cell by cell there as well. So you can go back and forth with a copy and paste. And in a lot of cases, that is the method that I've gone through for these. So when we look at this, I've got a .txt version of the file, and I've got also a .scr version of the file. And at that point, it's just a copy and then paste it into or a copy and paste and then change the extension if I want to keep the plain text file. It does open in Notepad regardless of what file extension it is, so you can edit that directly. If I click on that .scr, it'll open up in Notepad the exact same way that the TXT does, so you don't need to save them both. You can just change the .txt and work with that from the new file converted method. All right, so we've got a lot of background now about basic script functionality, when you would want to use it, when you wouldn't want to use it, how to come up with the command sequences for the entry that you need to put in. We talked a little bit about how we can start to leverage the spreadsheet or start to look at the spreadsheets to gather the information that we're trying to fill in, and then some of the color-coded content there. So let's take a look at some spreadsheets now. When we're working with this, I'm going to use layer commands as the example, because layer commands are really where you end up having to enter a whole lot of text. And in this particular case, if you've got tons and tons of layers, having a way to just instantly paste it in and autofill is a really, really big advantage. So when we're doing things like layer merging, layer renaming, changing any of the layer properties, those types of things, you can copy and paste content straight out of your layer properties manager in AutoCAD and then paste it into a spreadsheet, and it's going to paste it in there in terms of cells. So it'll space everything out in cells, and you're going to get a little bit of extra information when you do that. So one of the things that I've got set up in an example I'll pull up on the screen shortly is I've got a reference tab in the spreadsheet where it's going to just accept the raw data that I'm copying and pasting out of the layer properties. And I've got a link to a secondary spreadsheet with the code already put in there and the layer column referencing the cell that the layers would be pasted into on the reference tab. And after that, I just do an autofill to fill everything in. A couple of the other things that I was messing around with Autodesk University was getting a title block inserted inside of AutoCAD with a script. So I generate a new layout with a specific paper size and call a predefined title block for a company that gets inserted into the new layout tab that's in the drawing. And with that one, you could use the file DIA option and start out with the open command and actually open multiple files over and over and over again and repeat the same insert the title blocks. If you had like a folder of 5 files that you needed to create a new layout and add a title block to all at once, you could script that out and drop it in, and it'll automate the whole thing for you. And that was leveraging that file DIA command. And in this case, because I am trying to find a way to put in specific file name paths with spaces in some cases, quotation marks will work for certain file name calls. It doesn't work for the PC3 files with the plotter configuration, but it does work for opening files and inserting files for title blocks and things. And then the last thing that I have down there is that custom command macro from a script. So how to open up the CUI editor, create a new command, and paste your script content into the macro long string editor. And then you can actually create a command that lives inside AutoCAD, and it can be an icon that you put onto your tool palette. And then when you need to run it, you just click on the icon, and that's going to be it. So let's take a look at some of these. I know that we're running a little bit longer than Laurie had mentioned, but I do want to get through some of these examples in the spreadsheets themselves as well, just so that everyone can see these. So this is one of the examples where we're trying to automate the functionality in spreadsheets and leverage the autofill feature. So this one is a script file that renames a bunch of layers. So in this case, I have that semicolon up here in the top where I've got a couple of note lines. So in case anyone else needs to actually see or work with this file, they'll be able to open this up and they see at the top, this one was auto renaming existing layers to the new layer names. I've got them color coded. So it says autofill from row 5, and then it's a manual entry for the new layer name. So whatever I want the new layer names to be, I'd manually enter those, and then autofill from row 5 down. So right now it's all zeros because my reference tab here, where I've copy and paste layers from the properties box, this is still blank. So if I went back into AutoCAD and I took a look at a drawing file that just had maybe some generic layers in here, I've got my layer properties manager, and I just clicked on create new layer a few times. So I've got layers 1 through 11 plus the layer 0 there. If I do a Control A to select everything, and Control C to copy everything, when I get back into the spreadsheet, I can Control V and it pastes everything into the spreadsheet. And you can see that it comes in with the status column, which we aren't really going to be using, the name, on and off, freeze and thaw, lock or unlock, plot or no plot, color, line type, line weight, transparency, whether it's VP freeze or not, and then the description. So all of the content from the layer properties manager is now just copied and pasted into a spreadsheet. And it's very nicely tabled out in rows and columns and cells so that we can leverage this information straight into our script file. And with that second tab here that I've got, it says autofill from row 5 down. Since I've already set it up to link for that initial reference, the 0 layer comes up. So that's probably one that I'd have to get rid of because it's not going to let us rename 0. But if I look at the rest of them there, I just autofilled, and it autofilled layers 1 through 8. And if I keep going down, it'll autofill layer 9, 10, 11. So as many as I need. If this has got 100 layers in it, I just autofill down to 100, and then I know I have to update the layer names that I want for the additional information here for the rename. And the same thing for the command. It's always going to be that R function to rename after we start the layer dash layer prompt. So I need to have that R in the first column, and then I autofill the second column, and then I manually fill in the third column. Once this is done, I would just simply take everything that's here and copy that, and then take my blank script file and paste that in. And I've got a new script file that's ready to go to rename all of my layers from, layer, I guess again, I would have to clean up that layer 0 part of it. But so in my spreadsheet, all I'd have to do is autofill from one cell farther down. So instead of B2, it might be B3, so it skips 0. And then from there, I'd get all of the layers lined up. So this is how we would be able to just quickly leverage that content from the layer properties manager. Again, I did a Control A to select everything, Control C to copy everything, and then inside of the spreadsheet, Control V. One of the reasons why I did the keyboard commands there is if you right click, there's no option to copy. So the copy from the right click like Windows menu functions isn't going to be there, but you can Control C keyboard it out to your clipboard and then Control V to paste it into the spreadsheet. So that's where we would leverage Control C, Control V to get something like that into the spreadsheet. Also, within this type of functionality, as I go along, if I need to do something different from rename, it's just a matter of changing the prompt here. Instead of R for rename, the dash layer command has a lot of different functions. So almost every property that you saw here within these columns, on and off, freeze and thaw, lock and unlock, those can all be set through these types of layer property commands through that dash layer root command itself. And I have another spreadsheet here that I would like to switch over to. This one's got a bunch of different functions already built into it. So the purge 0 example that I gave you at the beginning is one of the first tabs that I created. It's just a single line. You can see here that it just runs through horizontally from start to finish what I would want to be entering there. I've got a layer generator command. So this is more a little bit more complex than just creating specific layers with names. In this case, what we're doing is creating the layer. We're calling a new layer named text with a color of cyan. It's going to be on. It's going to be continuous line type. It's going to be a default line weight. It's going to be transparency of 0. It's going to plot. It's going to be thawed. It's going to be unlocked. And if I need a description in there, I could also put in a description. The nice one about this is if you want to leave the description blank, you can leave it blank. In some cases, because that's a space, it would possibly cause an issue, but with this one, because AutoCAD is looking for you to type something in, it actually changes the space to an actual space, as though you were typing instead of an enter. So for the description column here, it does actually work if you just want to leave it blank. With this one, again, there's a whole lot of repeated entries here. So the layer name, for example, so we've got the text layer name, borders, objects. It's repeated for every different property that you've got along the way. So the reason why I have this highlighted in orange is this is the cell that I would need to manually enter data in. So it's color coded using the input color for Excel. So if I were to change this to Imagine It 1, then all of the other layer names here are all linked to that. So those are not color coded because they are linked. So I know that I only have to type in here and everything else is going to autofill for me. So I'm really reducing the amount of manual entry I have because of that functionality where we can link it to other files. Now, a lot of these would be manually entered. If you've got transparency differences, that's likely not something that you're going to autofill all the way down, but you could autofill everything that's 0 and then just come back and modify some if they need to be 50% transparent or so forth. Line type, same thing. We usually have blocks of layers that are the same line type, so you could autofill all the ones that you needed to be the same. You could also just do like a lookup table if you wanted to get in your line type so that you could pick it from a list as opposed to having to type them in. You really want to be careful with typos. That's another thing that happens quite often. If you're typing something in and you have a misspell, then it's not going to be recognized as the correct entry in the script when AutoCAD runs it. So it'll kick it out as an error, and then it'll just pause where it is. I see a lot of questions coming in. I don't want to stop too much longer because I know that I'm running overtime already. So let me jump into a little bit, a couple more examples, and then we will try and see if we can open it up for Q&A at the end. So a couple of other things that I wanted to kind of show in regards to a little bit more complexity within scripts is if we're looking at something like generating a whole bunch of layers from standards. So NCS standards, if you open up a template, you've got all the civil layers, all the survey layers, all the architectural layers. If you want to create subsets of layers for just survey or just civil, you can actually take all that content and copy and paste it out. So this particular tab is now set up to produce only the survey layers. So only the survey NCS layers would be created by this script. I've got another one that's for civil layers. So in case of civil layers, it's the same where it's all the C- layers instead of all the V- layers. And then for a couple of the other examples I have, One of the files that I've got is one that does the title block. So let me show you the title block here real quick. If I have a script file that opens up the layout command to create a new layout that's 34 by 22, it does a page setup, calls for the PC3 file, calls for the paper size, sets up the printable area, sets the CTB file, and then inserts the title block that I want. And you can see here that this one's got spaces in the name. So what I had to do for that one is just add the quotation marks around it at the end, and that quotation mark will let it read the file. So if I've got this script file and I've got a blank AutoCAD drawing or a standard AutoCAD drawing here that doesn't have a current 34 by 22 tab, so right now it's just got layout 1, layout 2. If I were to take that script and drop it into my drawing, what it's going to do is it's going to pull it in. Oh, my block is not there. Ha. So I've got the title block that came in with the image, but not the actual block itself. So I got to fix that one. But when I do that, you can see it created the layout. It set it up the paper size. My block, of course, I probably changed the name or I got a typo in there for something. So the image came in with the right reference and the page size is there. My block, I just got to fix that one. If you're looking for one that will do it for multiple files, so the only difference between this one with multiple files and the previous one where it creates the layout in the single drawing is I've started it out with file dia and open command. So now what it's doing is it's looking for these drawings specifically. So it's going to open a file called imagineit1.dwg, and then it's going to drop that layout into there. Then it's going to save it. It's going to open the next file, imagineit2.dwg, and it's going to drop in that same layout with a title block inside of there. And then it goes on and on and on. So as long as this path is appropriate and relevant and the files exist, it's going to just keep going over and over and over and opening up and inserting the title block in as many as you need. This is one, again, where I used the spreadsheet to kind of set it up and organize everything and make sure it looked all nice and neat. And then from there, I just did a copy and paste. And all I had to do was change the name of the file along the way to get that to update. So we've got this insert title block and create new layout command option or functionality that we can get to as well. So now the last thing that I would like to mention before the Q&A is I talked about a little bit about scripts from macros or macros from scripts and the long string editor. If I open up the CUI command and get to the CUI dialog box, inside of AutoCAD, you have the option of creating new commands. So if I created a new command and I found an image, so I pick an image for the icon, I give it a command name for whatever I want. And then inside of this little macro box here, if I open that up, the long string editor would allow me to just copy and paste the content from the script file itself. So I open up the SCR file, highlight everything, copy it, paste it into here, and then add another Control-C, Control-C at the end. It's going to create a command that lives inside of AutoCAD that you can then link to an icon that you could add to the tool palettes. So I went ahead and I did this a little bit earlier, and I have one called ImagineIt Layer Survey. And inside of this one, I gave that the command name, and I said it creates the NCS survey layers. So inside of the long string editor here, what you're going to see is just a straight copy and paste of what was inside of my survey script file directly into the long string editor. At the end, I did add the Control-C, Control-C, and then that was it. Clicked OK. I took that command and I dragged it into a custom tab inside of my tool palettes. And now if I'm inside of AutoCAD, I'm looking at my layers here. If I click on this icon and let it do its thing, it'll automatically just pop in all of my survey layers for me. So now I've got a quick icon that I can just click on straight out of the script file, paste it into the long string editor, and it's going to create all of my layers that I want. So you could do this for your own custom company layers if you have a workflow that involves adding your layers to a file, or if you've got your own personal workflow that you've got specific layers that you take notes on and things, and you delete them at the end for design purposes. You could run something like this to just automatically create them. You could have another script in there that automatically goes in and layer deletes everything afterwards, so that you know that in the end, if you wanted to get cleaned up, you would just simply clean up all of the extra layers and delete all of the ones that you don't want. So that's another sort of secondary step. Now, again, if you're looking for something that's going to give you a higher level of automation, then scripts are probably not the right option. This is going with sticking with stuff that can be manually entered at the command line, everything that can be typed in. So no real real complex user input features along the way. But if it is something that can be predefined through text, then definitely something that you could leverage in a script. I think that is just about the end of where I was at with my PowerPoint. So let me jump back here. Setting up references. This is something that we showed in the example Excel files. So autofill, copy and paste from the layer properties. And then I mentioned linking cells to reduce typos and errors along the way as well. The page setup command is something that you can run with that quotation mark for the file names. The quotation marks has been kind of tricky with scripts that I've been working on. For example, the PC3 file, that DWG to PDF, it doesn't like quotation marks around that one. So I had to go back and put in the underscores for the file name there. But it did allow me to use the quotation marks and keep the spaces in for the actual title block drawing file that came in. So in some cases, it is some trial and error and some editing along the way. Then the last thing that I showed you there was the macro long string editor dialog box, where we define the command and just simply paste the script content into the long string editor. So I think at this point I will stop and open it up for a few minutes of question and answer. And I will try and take a look at some of the comments that came in as well.